get before I forget recording. So we're here to talk a lot about biomimicry, but not just these classic conversations of like, what is it, why we should be excited about it, which is, I think many of us know that if you're here in this space, but how is it done? What is being done in this space right now? And in that like kind of hopeful thread of what's possible, how we can play a part in that, and how you might already be playing a part in that, how you can take it a step further and really dive into this field and use it as a toolkit for applying in your life, in your career, in your projects, in whatever space that looks like to you. And Jamie and I will share from our experience what we've been up to and what some of the things that we're doing right now that's really exciting. But for the most part, we want to hear from you, and we want this to be a conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jamie, and then I'll have Jamie do a little conversation about what he's been up to, and then we'll open it up to all of you after that. So Jamie's here with me, and you might want to pin our videos. I think it might be easier with such a big group. That's usually what I suggest doing for Zoom meetings. You can just like pin the presenter, and then their video kind of hovers even when they're presenting their screen. So Jamie Miller is the director of biomimicry for B+H Architects. That's a global architecture firm. He is also the founder of Biomimicry Frontiers, which is why we're all here today, an award-winning sustainability consultancy, and the founder of the Biomimicry Commons, which I'm now kind of director of and managing a lot of those educational offerings. So the Biomimicry Commons is an incubator and education platform named a 2019 world-changing idea by Fast Company, which is really exciting. Jamie holds a PhD in engineering, which focused on systems-level biomimicry and urban resilience, was the co-director of the OCAD University's biomimicry program, and was trained by Indigenous elders and the woman who coined the term biomimicry, Janine Benyus, on the deeper principles of biomimicry. Jamie's mission is to shift our collective perception of nature through the application of biomimicry and to create systems that are truly in harmony with their place. So that's a little bit about Jamie. He can go into more depth. And then like I said, I'm the director of the Biomimicry Commons, where I manage kind of our professional educational offerings. And we have some folks who've gone through that here, so you can have questions for them. We can invite them to share as well, where we kind of engage this incredible community of biomimics globally and hear about what they're doing and share resources and conversations and host events like this so we can get it out there. And our mission is 2 billion biomimics. You might have seen that on our website. And that's, an ambitious goal, but if we're all doing this, even imperfectly in our own way, that's what the world needs. So I got my master's degree in biomimicry at ASU. And while I was working there, I also helped to create an undergraduate program in biomimicry. So I'm really stoked about this education biomimicry space and getting this idea out there and getting people to do it, practice it, not just hear about it and read about it, but actually engage with it. I am currently a visiting instructor at Pratt Institute, which is a design university in New York, where I teach a class that I've created called Biology for Biomimicry, where I'm trying to get design students to think about this and do it more deeply. And I also run an after-school nature program for a nonprofit called the Kiva Center in the Denver area, which is where I am based. I'm also the host of a podcast that I created last year called Learning from Nature, which many of you might have heard of. At this point, we have almost 10,000 downloads, which is wild to me because people are hearing about biomimicry through this podcast, which is really exciting. I never thought I'd be in that space, but we're going to talk about it today. Like, what is our journey? How do we get there? I would say my ultimate passion is kind of this intersection of biomimicry, place-based education, and really engaging everybody in this exciting field. So I'm going to hand it over to Jamie. And we'll give a little bit of more of an overview, and then we'll dive deeper into some of these topics.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lily. And thanks everyone for coming. I love these meetings. We haven't had one in a while. And I want to say right off the bat, the point is the way I see this is it's a bit of a sandbox where biomimicry, I think, is a fresh practice. It's not totally clear how to do it. We're struggling as a species to figure out how to do it effectively. And so these are like opportunities for us to come together and share what's working, what's not working. And just to put it out there, we're going to be hosting these every other month. So this is why it's exciting for me to learn why you want to be here? Like, what is it that you want to get out of this 1 hour session together? And for those that have gone through the courses through the Biomimicry Commons, we're going to be meeting every other month as well, kind of staggering that to really talk about how you guys are working on it. So the point of today is to give a bit of an overview of biomimicry application. I'm super passionate about applying the practice, applying the philosophy, because that's where we're going to see the transformation. That's where we're going to see those 2 billion biomimics. And the reason we picked 2 billion is studies suggest that once 25% of a population adopts a mindset, the whole population, it's a flood from there. So the 75% takes over. So if we can get 25% of the global population thinking naturally, then we'll see this massive system shift. So that's why 2 billion. And I think we have a bigger number than we may realize. So what I want to do is talk mostly about, we'll talk a bit about some cool technologies and things happening in biomimicry, but I want to talk about my path and how it's a bit of a winding path to find my own niche in biomimicry and the application, so that hopefully people can learn from that and find their own niche. I'm very passionate about making sure that everyone, or encouraging people to find what they're genius at, what they're natural at, and bringing biomimicry to that. I've been thinking a lot lately that there's an article about biomimicry as a new design title, or like as a title in, and I was thinking about, like, there's no real expertise, people who've been doing biomimicry maybe for a long time, but I really see us as a species, as a young species, and we need to work together. I see biomimicry as almost like an ant colony. It's like we're all going to elevate the boats together, and there isn't going to be one leader taking us in a direction. It's like we all have to figure out how we can apply this to our own practices and how we can figure it out. So this is the context I'm holding for this community and for this conversation, is like, how can we all work together? How can we like dig in and figure out how biomimicry can apply to the world? The good news is that there's a surge right now. Biomimicry is finally finding, I think, its legs. There's articles, there's applications, there's a real adoption and interest in biomimicry. And as director of biomimicry for a global firm, I'm seeing clients really open up to the idea. And I even have critics in my own studios who don't think that biomimicry can be applied, but that's the fun part about this, is like my job is to creatively find ways to apply it and work with geniuses to figure out how we can convince or encourage a value proposition to a client, and it's actually happening. So you've probably seen this number, but the $1.6 trillion in expected global output for biomimicry-based technologies in the next 7 years. There's incredible technologies being researched in things like electric eels inspiring new kinds of power sources, learning from ants, the algorithm of ants for how to build better bridges, pine cones making more efficient buildings and walls. There's so much really cool stuff happening. And I want to just make a point here that I think a lot of people may have this perception that biomimicry is done in a lab, that you need to be in this like highly funded, really technical biological research institute. And I want to kind of challenge that today, that I really believe that any one of us can be doing biomimicry. And that's why it's important to find our niche and to build that conversation. I think that's going. No. There's some cool technologies you've probably heard of. One of the challenges I have is when we talk about biomimicry, we often use the same 8 examples: the Velcro, the wind turbine blades, the boxfish car. And that's cool. I think those are important for telling the story of biomimicry and communicating what it means to be biomimetic. But I want to kind of hit on some of these technologies that are growing more rapidly. So e-concrete, you may have seen this. It's this coastal, and Lily, jump in because you were just at Bioneers learning about these guys. But the big thing I want to talk about with this group is that between 2010 2013 and 2018, they had 3 global applications. Between 2019 and 2023, they just had 13 global applications. And they're named one of the best inventions by Time in 2019. Lily, do you want to talk about what this technology is?
Yeah, I'll do kind of a quick overview because I've been following them for a while on LinkedIn and just like in the community of biomimicry. They're kind of a really big growing name. And I don't have a ton of information. I think they weren't at Bioneers. I just like know of their developments through LinkedIn, but they're constantly sharing articles of like how they're being applied in new areas. They have a development in Southern California and a couple others, but they're kind of a creative biomimicry application because they have multiple levels of being inspired by nature. And I'll put their website in the chat here so folks can explore it. But it's one of the companies I'm most excited about right now that's really doing this, I think, in a creative space where they don't necessarily like project the biomimicry term like we're doing biomimicry, but it is biomimicry, and they're creating different habitats in, ocean kind of areas that are usually pretty slammed by storms, and they're making them more resilient both for people and ocean life through these like really beautifully shaped structures that are, interconnected and mobile. They can be stacked or layered. So they have a lot of biomimetic principles, but they're not outwardly saying like we're a biomimicry company, which I think we can talk about this later too, has helped them maybe a little bit. Because they're kind of what I like to call sneaky biomimicry. So I'm gonna post their website in the chat, and folks can explore on their own because it's a really wonderful company. And if you follow them on LinkedIn, they're constantly sharing, Time magazine articles where they're named like top companies where they get more funding from funding rounds, or big grant projects where they can work with researchers and scientists at this edge of kind of human ocean interface. That's a really fragile ecosystem that's going to be severely affected by climate chaos in the next 50 years. And we need to think about how to be resilient while also being, part of an ecosystem in a meaningful way. And they're doing a really great job at that.
Yeah, so this is form and systems-based biomimicry. APL Science, you may have heard of these guys. This is a hilarious biomimetic approach where they've copied the skin of fruit to make a skin for fruit that increases its longevity and shelf life. Check them out. I'm not going to give too much details about the technologies. Why I'm sharing these is I want to share their wins. So in 2021, this company was valuated at $2 billion. I want to show that biomimicry is surging as an idea, both in like philosophy, so winning awards like Best Inventions of Time magazine, but also you've got investors realizing that some of these biomimetic solutions are worth it. Mushrooms have gone wild, mycelium, everything. These are 4 examples of mycelium-based companies. And these are interesting because it's a bit of bioutilization. They're using mushrooms and mycelium to make products. But I think where they're trying to emulate nature is in the way to develop and manufacture things. So process-based biomimicry. So manufacturing materials that grow, that are fully biodegradable, and they're using mycelium, which is totally fine. In my mind, it's like we don't have to reinvent things if we could utilize nature in an effective way. To me, biomimicry is all about a dance. It's about dancing with nature and letting nature lead. And my personal mission is to blur that contrast between the built and natural environments. So 2 of these, Milo, you may know that one. It's a very famous like leather product now. They've created partnerships with Lululemon. They've made a shoe with Adidas or Adidas. I think her name's Stella McCartney, is a fashion designer. They're making bags. Biome in the bottom right-hand corner. They have a manufacturing facility where they're making insulating panels for houses. They have a manufacturing facility in the UK. They're doing now 30 houses per month. And they're making new facilities in the Netherlands and another one in the UK to enhance their production capabilities.
I'll also just say really quick that I think this age of biomaterials that we're entering is super exciting. because it is bringing in all these different approaches, and we're going to need that to create a life-friendly future, like what I like to call a life-friendly future. It's not only going to be deep, pure biomimicry, it's going to be bioutilization and bioassistance, thinking about the ethical concerns, obviously, but like looping in these different approaches. And mycelium packaging, seaweed packaging, it's all very exciting to me because it's starting that path, veering away from styrofoam, veering away from single-use plastics. And there's a lot of hope there for me.
This is pretty cool. The Kew Gardens in the UK did this massive design competition where they picked a bunch of trees and then encouraged people to design spaces around the trees. And one of them was specifically a biomimetic approach. And you can see on the right-hand side, the biomimetic winner. But I share this because this is cool to see big companies, big places calling out the term biomimicry. So there's something, as a collective, we're starting to see that term is gaining steam and becoming a bit of the front line. So Biomimicry Frontiers, we founded that company in 2017. Our mission was just to make it better naturally, and it's vague because we had no idea where to apply it. So if you're in a space right now where it's like, I don't know how to apply biomimicry, that's exactly where I was after I finished my PhD. And what we did is we just got lucky. We just kept talking about it. We kept meeting as many people as we could. We found this amazing client in India where I think he found us. I don't know how, where he asked us to bring biomimicry to his building. And so we got to do form-based biomimicry, process and systems-based biomimicry. We found a cannabis facility, and this was when cannabis was becoming legalized in Canada, where we applied technologies. I partnered with Jay Urmann and John Todd to design water and wastewater treatment systems and irrigation, like fluid mixing. And those, if you know biomimicry, those are kind of heavy hitters. I think they're both in Janine's book. I know that John Todd is, but Jay Urmann is like an absolute king of biomimicry. And I share this example because I literally just called them and they answered. And as like a nobody, I was pretty shocked and excited because I see these people, I regard them as a bit of a hero in the biomimicry world. We worked with a condo developer in Toronto, Tridel. Well, they're national. They're one of the bigger condo developers, and we applied Ornolux windows and a biomimetic art kind of piece, and this is in Toronto. And then in the city of Guelph, where I'm from, we had a circular food economy. And once I heard that, I just like forced my way in to say, like, if you're going to be truly biomimicry, or like if you're going to be circular, you have to have biomimicry as a part of your conversation. You have to recognize the fact that nature creates no waste. It's just this circular economy. So early on in Biomimicry Frontiers, it was about just like, it was kind of like a scattershot. It was very much like mycelium or like a fungus and mold. You just like spread your tentacles out and you find out where the food sources are. That was kind of the initial approach. But what I want to really present is that what happened is I started to hone in on my niche, the things that I'm really passionate about. And like a mold, like a slime mold, I started to feed that more with a more concerted effort and concentration. And for me, that's master planning. And I'll talk a little bit about this. This is a project we did in Saudi Arabia. This is a project in Vietnam that we won an award on, and this is in partnership with B+H Architects. And we did a couple other, one in BC. But the reason I am passionate about master planning, and I'm going to talk a bit about this, is that for me in my research in my PhD, I realized that the most effective tool we have for mitigating climate change is nature. And that the biggest impact we're having on nature is in these sprawling master plans, where we're building these communities under the mindset and the assumptions that humans are separate from nature, we need to fight nature. And so we spend a lot of energy creating systems that resist the natural world. And that's not going to be sustainable. And that's, to me, the dumbest thing that we're doing. So I wanted to focus on master planning because I want to build communities that work more harmoniously with nature And Micah, I saw your point earlier. It's like, how do you create resiliency? And for me, resiliency is finding that dance and that balance where you work more harmonically with the natural world. And I'll get into that in a minute, because this is where I'm pretty focused right now. So anyone interested in biomimicry, I know a lot of you are practicing it. This is one of the key value adds that you bring to any company, any project. So innovation is seeing what everybody else has seen and thinking what nobody else has thought. Being in a studio, being in a research lab, being in any company, if you're thinking with a biomimetic lens, you're instantly more valuable because you're seeing what everyone else is seeing and thinking what nobody else has thought, because you're probably asking, how would nature do that? Like when I think of a wall, and we talked about this in OCAD, it's like, what if a wall could breathe or expand or shed or sweat? When I think of infrastructure and building masses, it's like, what if that was more like a bone, adding materials where there's stress and strain and removing materials where there isn't? This is the thinking, this is the lens of biomimicry, and this is truly the value add that you can have right away. Any one of you can have this and bring it to your company or to your projects. It's just asking that simple question, how would nature do it? And so barrier number two, number one was the belief that you may need to be in a deep research lab. Or the other barrier is people think you need to be a biologist or a designer to do biomimicry. And I'm strongly against that. I dropped out of biology because I hated it in like grade 10 or grade 11. It's just about creating a conversation with nature. And there's lots of good resources out there, like asknature.org, the Encyclopedia of Life. But also just like going outside and having a deep conversation with nature. This is where, when you ask that question, like how would nature do it, you can go and find it, and you can find a metaphor, and you don't have to have a research lab. You don't have to be a biologist. You can just start to unpack it yourself. So in 2021, the end of 21, B+H brought me on as their director of biomimicry. And we realized that might have been maybe the first time that title has been used. But Microsoft does have a director of biomimicry. And I say these things because what's exciting is that when I started biomimicry in 2004, this was the furthest thing from my mind, that I could make a job out of this. I thought I would have to just follow some engineering path, but now we're seeing a tipping point again, that people are bringing biomimicry to their studios with, like, conviction is really the best word for it. Like, they want biomimicry. And so if you're interested in this field, or if you're practicing in this field, recognize that some of the big industries, you know, Nike's been doing biomimicry, General Electric has been doing biomimicry, but none of them have asserted somebody as their director of biomimicry. And with Microsoft and B+H, and B+H, I'll mention, is a part of a larger network. They're owned by a company in Singapore called SJ, Surbana Jurong. Surbana Jurong has 16,000 employees, and it was actually SJ that wanted biomimicry. So this international massive company, they wanted biomimicry, and they want biomimicry infused in all of their practice. So I share this because it's an exciting time. In the last year, these are some of the projects we've worked on. We designed a tower in partnership with our engineers based on mangrove foundations and dragonfly wing structures. It was so fun to work with the engineers who, in my mind, historically are the ones that stop the creative biomimicry process. But these guys and ladies were like so into figuring out the algorithm to make these structures work using Fibonacci spiral in their computer modeling to make sure that it's structurally sound. I was so lit up by that they were like, let's figure this out. This is an amazing problem. We've been chatting with some researchers at the U of T. You may have seen this article where they're using squid skin, say that 5 times, to make liquid windows that can change their change the amount of light that comes in, also change the color and the spectrum of light that comes in, all automatically, just using fluids. So, you know, imagine with our massive buildings and glass windows, like imagine the facades could organically change in a heterogeneous pattern where they're like closing the light from coming in. So you don't need blinds, you don't need physical barriers. We've explored with the healthcare industry, how do you bring light into a building? We know that light has really positive impacts on healing. But one of the problems with hospitals is that you only get light on the outside of the building, and you may have 3 or 4 beds in one room. And so it's just the one bed closest to the window that really gets to benefit from those healing properties. So we looked at polar bears and insect eyes, figuring out what if we used fiber optics to bring light in, or what if we like rethought flooring and had translucent flooring so that light could penetrate deeper into a building. Exploratory ideas. With that India project, we were able to actually design this biomimicry, like a design report, which is almost like a building standard. And this is something we're pushing for is, there's things like LEED, there's the Living Building Challenge, but we're actually trying to explore like, what would it look like if there's a biomimicry building standard? And with this India house, we got to really practice and identify, create a report card for this to see like, yeah, how good are we? How close are we to nature? We've partnered with this off-grid cabin company to design these master plans based on cabins. So cabin is this prefabricated off-grid home on helical piles, so you can put them anywhere. They're very light on the land. So they came up with the technology, and we're helping them build communities with these technologies, not just individual homes, but how do you create more sustainable and integrated and healthy communities? So this gets me to this point. And if you have any questions, please jump them in the chat. I know I'm ripping through things right now, but I want to give you a quick overview. This is the thing that I'm most passionate about as an individual. This idea of creating living stories of places for master planning, and specifically for resilient master planning. The living story is about understanding what the land wants to do, what it will support us in doing, what it will permit us to do, and what it will teach us to do. And in this way, it's like systems level biomimicry. And it took me a long time to figure this out. And I want to make it very clear that it wasn't just my idea. It was from my research, which is the aggregation of a bunch of people's ideas, and then practicing it with master planners and landscape architects. And now with B+H being embedded in their planning team, we keep refining this methodology and this tool. But this is like my personal kind of passion. This is where I find can be the most effective, is in bridging this Western science approach, using fluid modeling, understanding fluids and rivers and water health, understanding topography, understanding systems and engineering. And then also working with Indigenous people, which is something that I'm passionate about, and I work closely with many people in Indigenous communities, bringing those worldviews together to tell this holistic story, this interpretation of a place. And the point is to understand what the land wants to do so that we can more strategically build and design within it. And this is the point, is like, we've been building under this assumption that we can resist nature for a long time. And we've been relatively successful, but we're at a point now where our buildings and our infrastructure is so big and the climate is so dynamic that we're coming up against these two worlds are coming together and fighting, and it's expensive to fight nature. This is an article from yesterday where it says restoring nature can lead to fewer road runners. So I want to give 2 examples. And actually, before I do, I'll just read Claire's point. Yeah, so this idea you need deep knowledge of natural systems or techniques applied is true. And yeah, the question of are there ways to apply this knowledge without a specialist's help? So this is kind of the point of this whole conversation, is that you will not do biomimicry effectively alone. All of this is done in collaboration. So we find partnerships, even in the earlier examples. When I was applying biomimicry at the cannabis facility, I called the experts. I called John Todd. I called Jay Urmann. When we're doing these master plans and these living stories, we bring in expert modelers who can tell me what's happening in the hydrogeology. And my role is really just to try to interpret this data in a way that the client can understand and the architects can use to build strategically. So this is not, I'm not necessarily a specialist in any of these things. I feel like I'm more of a generalist, and it's about like pulling this picture together so that the designers can do their thing. So at B+H, I let the planners do the planning, but I give them some key barriers or key ideas that they need to build with in mind, because if you don't follow that, I suspect you're going to have some major problems down the road, or even you might be missing some major opportunities. So this is a project. I'm actually in Alberta right now, working on this project. It's with the Métis Nation, who are an Indigenous group here in Canada. And they have this 608 acres of land that they're repurposing into a Métis showcase, showcasing and highlighting really the beauty of their culture, their ideas, their practices, their ways of thinking, their infrastructure and designs. And we brought that living story methodology to them. And in this, it's good to show that it's not just learning the story of the land, but the people as well, the people who have been on this land. So it's understanding the history of the Métis people and how they relate, you know, understanding their relationship with bison. If you know anything about the Métis, it's an incredible history. And especially with relationship to the bison and how they followed the bison, followed the land. And so we did do some fluid modeling. We figured out what's the hydrodynamics of this place, because we identified that that might be the biggest risk in terms of climate change, but it's also the greatest opportunity, because this land is already treating water. It's already got really great water saturation and water holding capabilities. It has this very dynamic water system. And so we mapped that out and understood that, so that we're not putting buildings and infrastructure in inopportune places. We're not paving over areas that's going to increase overland flow and funnel it right down and flood certain buildings. So this has been super helpful for them, just in locating where to put infrastructure, but also how to leverage the existing ecological services. Nature's doing a lot of good work for them, you know, sequestering carbon, creating soils, retaining water, purifying water. And so we made sure that we're not disrupting those as well. We're actually like working ways to build with it, with those systems. And then we've helped the architects kind of identify where things could go. And so this includes, we have elk and bison on this land. So we've brought back bison, elk, and horses, and we're putting them in certain areas and encouraging them to recirculate them, because bison are ecological engineers. They will knock down a ton of trees, but by their very nature, they help create more biodiversity. It's kind of like a beaver. You think it's a bad species because it's chopping all the trees down. But if you just let them be, they actually create more biodiversity. So we're bringing those strategies into this design. And I'll quickly go through this last example, but this is a project in Ontario. And this is where we've brought in, there's a group called Risk Logic, and they just do incredible mapping. They have access to data for interpreting a landscape and the climate and the relationship between the two. And they've helped us kind of understand what this land wants to do. And we look at it at multiple levels, like macro level. It's like, how is this site related to a bigger picture? Because master planning is not just about, you know, 500 acre or 200 acre property. It's the whole system. And we identified that this area that we're developing is like a key part of the tributaries to this massive swamp. The Minising Swamp in Ontario is one of the biggest wetlands in the province. And so this is a big part of our story. And so we designed in a way where we're encouraging the tributaries to to continue to feed that swamp instead of building on top of it or bulldozing over top of them. Because if you think of it, as if you bulldoze over top of those, and if climate change continues to add greater precipitation, nature will find its rivers again. It'll find its tributaries, and that's what we're seeing is when we design without that knowledge or without that fighting. If we're fighting against the natural flows of the environment, we're going to lose. It's going to be expensive. And so this is a design that we've come up with, bringing those water systems as a key part of our infrastructure and our design. And this actually has won us an award with our parent company in Singapore. And one of the key things, so we believe in this idea of going way beyond doing less harm. Our whole philosophy is based on we are nature, and that our breath feeds trees, our bodies will feed soil. What if our infrastructure could feed more biodiversity? What if it could be a contribution? And so one of the things that we've done is measured the ecological performance of this site before us and after us, and said, are we sequestering more carbon? Are we reducing more noise? Are we regulating temperature? We want to make sure our infrastructure is a contribution. And so we're trying to measure that and figure out, how do you measure that? And then we also measure things like how much food we can produce in food forests, how much rainwater we can harvest to get off the grid, stuff like that. So I want to end there, and I want to open it up to maybe a bit of a conversation. But the last thing I want to say is that for me, we call this the living story because biomimicry has been a dance with nature for me for the last almost 20 years. And I love this design in India. These are the rubber tree bridges that over generations, people have taken the roots of rubber trees and put them over a river, and they've actually built bridges using these roots. They continue to grow, they become thicker, they become more robust. And I think that this is the philosophy I'm aiming for, is creating this beautiful dance with the natural world. And as a friend says, it's like we've been given this painting, a Picasso, let's say, a Van Gogh. It's already amazing. Nature is already incredible, but we're being invited to add to it. And I think for the last several hundred years, most of us have just been scribbling on like a bunch of kids. And we need to learn those like unique techniques. We need to be learning from the artists in order to add in a way that's a contribution. And this is a quote Janine said to me back in 2007. And that's been one of my favorite quotes, is that we're not necessarily a bad species, just a very young one. So thank you for listening to that spillage of thoughts and approaches. But I really want to share how we've been applying biomimicry in hopes that we can encourage you to find your own path, whatever it is that you're excited about, passionate about, and want to do to apply it.
Thank you, Jamie. I have something I want to add to you based on the question that Clara asked earlier. And I think it's a good segue. And this is another invitation for folks, just really quick reminder to post a question in the chat. We have about 10 minutes, maybe like eight minutes more like, to do some question and answers and have conversations. So if you have something that's come up, please post it in the chat. But I think this question about how to bring people in, if we need to bring people in, is a really good one, because that collaborative process is beautiful and it is so powerful. Yes, you can get inspired by biomimicry and do the reading and do the learning and do the work on your end so you can be a better painter, like Jamie said. But then bringing in the person that's been, studying this one species of squid for 20 years to help you inform that design. And oftentimes they will spark something that's not something you would have thought of because of their research, because of their area. So this idea that nature rewards diversity and collaboration, and so does this practice, and so does this process. I interviewed Raphael, who was part of the research team for that squid inspired building skins, and I was just so inspired. It's like he's a pretty young scientist in this space and doing this research, but just by having a conversation for my podcast, which will be his conversation will be published in a couple months. I had so many more ideas than I wouldn't have had originally. So I think the collaborative process is really powerful. It's just finding your niche And then bringing in the right people to have those conversations and have that collaboration with is crucial. And then you're going to have a plethora of ideas from which to run with on that one. Oh, it was a great question. What is the Biomimicry Commons? We are definitely going to save some time at the end to do a quick introduction, but Jamie, do you want to introduce what this Find Your Niche is about, and then I can add on to it?
Yeah, the Commons was created right before I joined B+H in an effort to encourage other people to find their biomimicry practice, whether they're in a company, whether they want to build a company, whether they want to build a product, it didn't really matter. The energy was like, let's help people bring biomimicry to whatever they're doing. And so it's part education, part incubation, like incubate your idea or your practice, and also part community. And I think there's a lot of work we can do in building that community. I think it feels like it's still got some growing pains what the Commons is, but we have products right now at multiple levels that you can start to hone in on. How do you bring biomimicry to what you're doing? And also, like, how do you learn that mindset of biomimicry? How do you find your niche? We have a whole module on identifying what it is that you could be bringing biomimicry to, like what's your purpose? And that's important to us because, like, the project I'm working on with the Métis, I am so excited about the work that I do because it's so aligned with my purpose, and it's taken me a while to figure that out. And that energy gives me a lot of both stamina and perseverance. So it's like when people are like, biomimicry shit, or like, I don't think this is going to go anywhere, I'm like, I'm so committed to my purpose that noise doesn't distract me from continuing to push on. So knowing your purpose is a powerful fuel for your application of biomimicry. And that's what these courses are about. And I want to really leverage that community now that we have, I think we've got a big group that's gone through these courses, and some of them are here, and I really want to reconnect with them and engage with them in a more concerted way so that we can build as a community and help each other out.
Yeah, and this is a space where Jamie has poured, 18 plus years of his experience. I've poured 10 plus years of my experience into these courses. And so the Commons is like a space, a community. The idea that we want this information to be so disseminated that it is part of the commons of our society. And there's a couple offerings. If you want, Jamie, I can share my screen so I can show folks. And then we can continue having this question, but I'll just kind of leave this slide up too, because there's a couple offerings that I just want you all to know about before everyone hops off. And this is, again, an effort to have you be able to do this. And we've talked about this, and there's a lot of different ways to do this, but there's kind of these different levels that we have at the Commons for where you're at and what you want to apply. So we have this kind of intro booklet that's part of our kind of PDF workbook, which I'll email everyone after this as part of the recording. We'll send recording and the first module of the PDF book. And then there's also a self-paced course that's online that you kind of go at your own pace. There's not as much kind of community around that. You're part of a Slack channel and you can have conversations. And then we also have this biomimicry mastermind that only happens once or twice a year. And it's cohort based. You have calls with folks. It's kind of an intensive 6 to 10 week program, depending on the program. And it's a way to, like, really, you have a project, you want to see it in reality. That's a good way to do that. So this is the list of offerings. I've also included our email here and our website. So send me an email. This is me. I'll answer you at hello@Biomimicry Frontiers. And we want these conversations. This is exactly why we have events like this and have these spaces, because we created all of these offerings at different levels so we can engage folks and get them involved in a way that's meaningful for you. I think I saw a good question about how to find, like, groups or people doing this in your area. And I think that's a nice jumping off point too. We could have a whole conversation about this. But yeah, so, like, for example, you're asking about maybe New Jersey specific. I don't know if there's a specific New Jersey biomimicry group. There are some biomimicry folks in New York. Like, I know Pratt is in New York and they have some biomimicry networks. The Biomimicry New York City network is there. They're not super active, but there are folks there that are excited about biomimicry. And then tapping into this global network, I think, is the power of biomimicry. So joining these groups on LinkedIn, on Facebook, even just like going on hikes in your area and like talking about biomimicry and starting those conversations is really important, because some people might be interested, but in the same boat as you, right? Like, I don't know who to connect with in my area. And I think that's really powerful too. What other questions do we have here?
There's a question about how to apply it to oil and gas industry.
Yeah.
What I found in applying it to any industry is like, you've got to get on the phone and you've got to understand what their problem is. And what I mean by that is like, try to figure out, like, if you can distill the problem into a function, like what is it that they want their design to do, or what are they trying to achieve? That function is kind of the key point, the jumping off point for doing biomimicry. Because if you can, whether it's treating water, I don't know, or whether sequestering carbon or moving fluids more efficiently, if you can identify that function, that's when you can start to creatively engage nature and be like, okay, how does nature do it? How does nature move fluids? How does nature sequester carbon? And we talk more about this in our courses, because the next step after that, once you see a metaphor in nature, is, all right, now how do you create a technology that serves that function? And that's where the creativity comes in. And I want to stress that biomimicry's only limitation in my mind is creativity. It's the creativity in finding inexpensive ways of making that metaphor real. And I find creativity comes from the commons, when you get a bunch of diverse thinkers in a room and be like, okay, how do we make fluids, how do we make gas move more efficiently through a pipe? And you never know which networks or where people will take it, but and there are biomimicry technologies based on that, but having that community, that's kind of the basic way of doing biomimicry and bringing it to any industry. Hopefully that's helpful.
And I'll say this too, because it is related to Bioneers, where I just spent last weekend. So Bioneers is a conference that happens every year, and I recommend folks look into it. I think if you just go to like bioneers.com, it's a incredible space of hope and battery recharge, and you can network with folks. And a huge emphasis this year was electrifying everything, and how this kind of new wave of electric energy and electric batteries, and how we're going to be moving in that direction. So at the same time, making other technologies that are just as powerful, just as efficient, rise to the surface at the same time as we're seeing gas and oil kind of start to decline. And there's a lot of hopeful organizations doing that, including the New Energy Nexus. I think I'm saying that right. Danny Kennedy runs that. He has a podcast, I think, with Kate Blanchett. And he talked a lot about, like, you know, this seems like a far off thing, like, oh, renewables and then energy or electric energy powered things, but it's happening now. And same with biomimicry. All these technologies need to happen at the same time, so we can collectively start to take down some of those more destructive practices that we want to see gone in the next 50 years. We don't want to be dealing with oil and gas in 50 years. That doesn't mean we can't make it more efficient or more life friendly now, but we also need to push it out. And Bioneers is a great space to just realize that it's happening, realize that those technologies exist and that people are doing it. And same with biomimicry. That's why we're here. Great questions. Well, I think we have time for maybe one more.
I'm just going to quickly say to Micah, if you're still here, reach out to me about resiliency in municipalities. This is something that that new goal project, we're actually helping write the policy of the municipalities using that living story methodology. So I think it'd be good to connect on that. So just reach out to me.
Yeah, and that goes for anyone for this Hello at Biomimicry Frontiers. If you're, kind of thinking about where you're at, or you want to ask a question, like, we're here. We want this information to be out there. We want you to be doing biomimicry and not just, going on hikes and talking about it with friends, but like practicing it if that's what it means to you. Also, I saw somebody ask a while ago about kind of reconnecting people to nature, and this might be a good spot to kind of wrap up. I think biomimicry is such a beautiful way to introduce folks to a deeper relationship with nature. We are nature, like Jamie said, and this conversation of what is our place in the world and these habitats that we're building, that we're living in. It's not some far off, there's a wild space like Yosemite that's an incredible national park, and I can drive there and visit it and then come back to my home and I'm separate from nature. That's just not the case. And I think the first part of reconnecting folks with nature is building that curiosity and awe and realization that it's everywhere. The weed sprouting up in the sidewalk out in front of your house that's between two cracks in the concrete, like, that's a resilient plant that blooms and has flowers and attracts pollinators. And there's so much awe and inspiration around us. And I think that's a good starting point, just realizing that we are in deep relation with the natural world. Jamie, do you want to finish us off here?
I'm just answering a question, sorry.
Oh, it's all good.
No, I think everything that I feel pretty complete. The one thing I'd love to know, and as you wrap up, I'd love to know what else you'd like to learn from these workshops or from these check-ins every other month. Like, what is it? What are the barriers that you're facing? What's getting you excited? I want to use this platform as a community as much as possible. And then to finish up by just saying, like, this to me really is this level playing field where we need all of us to work together. And so part of the commons is, it was my attempt to just share everything that I've learned in the last 19 years, to give it to you guys so that you can figure out your own niche and your own practice. And I really think this is going to be a collaborative move, and I'm excited because the more that we're all trying to like bang our heads together, because I don't know how to do biomimicry any better than anyone else. It's just like I just keep banging my head against walls with people, and we figure it out. We find a little area to apply it, and we can tell a good story. I guess the last thing I'll say is, like, to me, the most important thing is that I see biomimicry as a gateway to a conversation with nature, and that the most important thing we can do is recognize her genius and have this ongoing conversation to see how much she's providing, not only in our physiological, like our bodies and the ecological services, but in the genius that she can provide in teaching us how to design or how to be a part of community or how to build resilience. So my goal is to have biomimicry as an obsolete term, because we are so deeply ingrained or embedded in this conversation with nature that that we're continuing to really transform the way that we think, behave, and create. That's what it's all about, is just being in conversation. And I'm super excited because the conversation, I think, is growing. We're seeing that we're in a situation where we have to really think differently. And nature's like a great, it's just standing there. I always think it's hilarious. It's like, it's just sitting there waiting for us to ask it. And this is what Indigenous elders have taught me. It's like, you just have to sit with it, and she'll tell you. And the longer you sit, the more you'll learn. So yeah, would love to hear what you guys want to learn, and we'll end at that.
Yeah, and there's some great questions in the chat. I encourage you to hold on to those. We'll reflect on these before our next meeting in not next month, but the month after. So June, we'll have another one of these meetings, and think about what resonated with you, what you're reflecting on, and bring that to the next conversation. We're excited to dive a little deeper into all this with you all. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. We'll send everyone an email with this recording. We're going to put it up on YouTube, as well as this slide and that free intro booklet. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone.
See y'all later.